Thank you. Good afternoon. We are waiting for Commissioner Maldonado to join us, and I know he is signing on from Washington, D.C. So give us just a moment, and we've got a few other commissioners that we are waiting to sign on. In the interim, I believe we have the president of Los Angeles Valley College here with us, Barry Gribbins. And President Gribbins, I would love for you to provide some welcoming remarks or greetings if you'd like to. You don't have to, but we're just thrilled to be here and just appreciate for you all creating the space for the Racial Equity Commission to be here.
Let me give this back. Thank you so much for that introduction. It's truly our pleasure to host you here at LA Valley College. Love the work that the commission is doing, and anything that we can do to support you, we're absolutely thrilled to do. That we have a shared commitment. It's a core part of all of our mission. So we love what you're doing, and so glad to have you here at Valley College.
Thank you. And we've been working very closely with the community college systems throughout California, and it's been really wonderful to bring the work of the Racial Equity Commission directly into community through the system. So thank you for opening your doors for us.
Our pleasure. And I'd be remiss if I didn't make one more comment too. We are thrilled with the support that we've had the California community colleges in general and Valley College specifically, especially with the governor in support of our equity work in the recent years. There's been really important funding for our Dream Resource Centers, emotional programs. So all of that has had a tremendous impact, and we're deeply appreciative.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Do we have Commissioner Maldonado with us yet?
Yeah, I've been right here.
Good to see you, Commissioner Maldonado, and I will turn the meeting over to you to call the meeting to order.
Well, thank you everybody for being patient. I'm in Washington, D.C., trying to hold it down for the state of California. I was representing California today. It was not an easy meeting, but I would like to call this meeting to order. And I would first like to begin by acknowledging the land of the indigenous people where our staff is meeting today. This land acknowledgement was approved by the Los Angeles Valley College on May 2023, and I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. And we encourage you to find ways to support the local indigenous communities. We at the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation join you all from the Los Angeles Valley College. Very excited. Thank you all for being our host. And long before Spanish, Mexican, Anglo-American settlers and the street names of Mulholland, Sepulveda, and Van Nuys, the Fernando, and I'm struggling with this name, Tataviam, I want to make sure I say it right, and Mission Indians, the indigenous Americans of the San Fernando Valley, the Band of Mission Indians and the indigenous Americans of the San Fernando Valley hustled, farmed, gathered, and prospered alongside the banks of the Orit and the river that runs along the present-day Los Angeles Valley College. I want to make sure I acknowledged everybody. We acknowledge the Fernandino Taveam and their Gabrielino Tongva, neighbors to the east, and the Veternino Chumash, neighbors to the west. I hope I did honor to those names. And their land acknowledgement represents the effort to build community and future collaboration and the local indigenous population guests on their land. So I want to acknowledge that and go over to Jordan for the slide review of the agenda today.
Commissioner Maldonado, we actually need to go back, and we have on section 1A some additional opening remarks that are just some reminders for the guests around speaking and our other issues around public comment and how we do not tolerate hate.
If you could so as we continue to engage guest speakers, presenters, and the public, we want to name that the information and opinions that are expressed here today that they reflect the commission and reflects the views of the speaker. They do not necessarily represent the views of the commission or the governor's office of the land use and climate innovation. Additionally, the public body public comment is critical to the work of the commission, and we allow the public input in all of our meetings. However, we stand united with other Californians in condemning hate and recognizing the commitment, whole or in part, for persons' actual or perceived identified characteristics, including race, persons' actual or perceived abilities, their characteristics, including their race, color, disabilities, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, and gender, including gender identity, because of the person's protected group. And as a reminder, the hotline for any identified hate speech is available, and I apologize, it's a lot that we have to go over. The report hate line is 833-8-NO-HATE, or we can also visit cavshate.org. And I believe that was the acknowledgement. If we can make sure that Jordan can review for the slides for our agenda today.
Thank you, Commissioner Maldonado. I'll be reviewing the agenda today. Our agenda covers 8 agenda items, and we have hard copies of the agenda available at our physical location at Los Angeles Valley College, 5800 Fulton Avenue, Valley Glen, California, 91401, in the ACA building, room 2504. Materials are also available online at racialequity.lci.ca.gov. Today's meeting agenda, we're currently on item 1, welcome and call to order. We will then have public comment on items not on the agenda. We will then have the 2 committees here. This is a joint meeting between the Budget Equity and Data committees. There will be approval of each individual committee's minutes from February 20th. We will then have a presentation, and this is depending upon timing. We are looking for some flexibility today. We have joining us District 2 Supervisor Holly Mitchell, who will be talking alongside Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza with LA County on some of the work that LA County has done around looking at data and how they've applied that data to inform the distribution of American Rescue Plan Act dollars here within LA County. We anticipate Supervisor Mitchell arriving around 4:30 p.m. and we'll adjust our agenda to align with her arrival. We may move forward with agenda item 7, which you see here is a presentation on data standards, which will be given by Jason Lally with the Office of Data and Innovation. What I hope to spend most of our time today on is a presentation and discussion really around some of the key themes that we've heard at both our data and our budget equity committee meetings, and to talk a little bit about some of the intersections that we are seeing with some of the policies that are being introduced as bills this year in this current legislative session, as well as what we may want to look at and move forward as a commission in terms of recommendations on the framework. And so we'll have an opportunity for more engagement and discussion later today. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Commissioner Maldonado, so that we can move forward with roll call and public comment process.
Okay, well, let's begin with roll call, please.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Thank you. We'll begin roll call with Commissioner Gabriel Maldonado,
Present.
Commissioner Candace Bowles,
Here.
Commissioner John Kim,
Here.
Commissioner Jolie Onodera,
Here.
Commissioner Dr. Manuel Pastor,
Presente.
thank you, Commissioner Traco Matthews,
Present.
and Commissioner Yolanda Richardson. Okay. We have achieved quorum for this meeting. Please note that for today's meeting, the committees are following the special teleconference rules for advisory bodies outlined under Government Code, Section 11123.5, which allows members to participate remotely. Under these rules, the committees may vote on proposed actions to bring to the full commission. Thank you to everyone joining us today, online or in person. I'm here to provide guidance for the processes for this hybrid meeting, which we have designed with the intention of maximizing access by members of the public. Please note, we are providing Spanish interpretation services. For those joining the webinar online via Zoom or by phone, please note that your microphone is automatically muted when you join. To minimize the risk of background noise, you will not be able to unmute yourself. For those joining online via Zoom, please note that the webinar platform does not enable video for attendees, so we will not be able to see you. If you need technical assistance during the meeting or have a question online, about the meeting process, there are a few ways to contact us. If you are online via Zoom, the best way is by using the Q&A function, with several members of the Racial Equity Commission team monitoring it. If you joined by phone and you have access to email, please email racialequitycommission@opr.ca.gov. To make an in-person public comment, you can pick up a comment card at the back of the room and return it to one of our staff members. You will need to submit a public comment card for each item you wish to speak on. If you plan to make public comment virtually, you must be online via Zoom, either through the webinar or phone option. To submit an online public comment form, you can visit racialequity.lci.ca.gov/meetings/ and complete the public comment form linked on there. You'll need to complete a separate form for each item on which you wish to speak. You may complete a form at any time during the meeting. When the chair of the committee opens a public comment period for your item, we will call on your name. When you hear your name, please raise your hand to do this online. Please raise your hand. To do this online in the Zoom webinar, you can click the raise hand function under the participants menu. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. To raise your hand by phone, press *9. When it is your turn to speak, a member of our team will unmute your microphone. If you are online, you will see a window pop up alerting you that the host is unmuting you. You will need to click the option to approve unmute. After that, you can begin your comment. If you are on via your phone, you will hear a recorded message alerting you that your line is unmuted. You can begin your comment once your line is unmuted. Each speaker will have a maximum of 2 minutes to make their remarks. Speakers requiring or using interpretation services are allotted 4 minutes to facilitate full participation. If you're online, you'll see a timer pop up on your screen. Please monitor that and wrap up your remarks accordingly. Whether you're online or via phone, staff will notify you when your time is up. After that, we will mute your microphone. You do not need to take any additional action. If you are unable to complete the online form for public comment, but would like to make a public comment, please email racialequitycommission@opr.ca.gov. Thank you. Back to you, Commissioner.
So now we will take any public comments to agenda item number 1 on the welcome.
Moment, I do not see any online public comments. Are there any in-person public comments? If there are none, I will hand it. We can close public comment for this agenda item.
Wonderful. So we will now transition over to item number 3, the meeting minutes. This meeting includes the approval of the February 20th, 2025 Budget Committee meetings.
Commissioner Maldonado, I actually need us to go back to item 2. We do have a item where we have to take public comment on matters not on the agenda prior to going to the approval of minutes.
Understood. So are there any comments for items that are not included on the opening welcome?
I do not see any online public comments for agenda item number 2. Are there any in person?
There are none in person.
Thank you. Back to you, Commissioner Maldonado.
So now we will transition to agenda item number 3, the minutes from 2025 on February 20th.
And it looks like we'll look at the Budget Equity Committee minutes that everyone should have received and are also posted online. if there are any comments, questions from the committee members, please let us know. And if there are none, we do need a motion.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if there's no other comments, I'll take a motion for approval.
Happy to make a motion to approve the budget equity.
I'll
committee.
second.
Motion made by Commissioner Onodera,
I'll second.
seconded by Commissioner Matthews.
So I do have to pause there. It does need to be the Budget Equity Committee only that can
Ah.
do the motion in the second, because these are your minutes.
My
I'll
apologies.
second.
So I'll take from Commissioner Kim or Commissioner Bowles. Commissioner Kim seconded.
Yep.
All those in favor say aye.
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 It's been
Motion
approved.
carries. And so now I need to invite Commissioner Pastor to come off mute and run the motion for the Data Committee meeting minutes. And I know we only have 2 members here with us, but that does constitute, I believe, a quorum for that committee.
I'll make that motion.
So, thanks for that. I guess I will second, since that's what we need to do here. So before we approve, are there any comments, questions, or discussions from Draco or from me? And we have both a motion and a second. Augustine, please take the roll call vote, although I believe I know what the answer will be.
Yeah, I will go ahead and start with yourself, Commissioner Manuel Pastor,
Yes.
and Commissioner Draco Matthews.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
We will now take any public comment related to this agenda item of approving the minutes. Augustine, as usual, can explain the rules.
Thank you, Commissioner. As a reminder, you may submit a virtual public comment card by visiting racialequity.lci.ca.gov/meetings/ and completing the public comment form linked there. You can also pick up an in-person public comment card at the back of the room and return it to one of our staff members. You will need to submit a public comment card for each item you wish to speak on. For agenda item number 3, I do not see any online public comments. Are there any in-person public comments?
No, there are none.
Thank you. Back to you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Maldonado, I'd like to, I guess it's a point of order. We do not have Supervisor Mitchell here with us yet. We know that she is not scheduled to arrive until she's here.
I'm
Dr.
here.
Estes, I think she's here. Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay, great. I hear her. Don't see
You
her
don't,
yet.
you don't see me?
Not yet, but I do hear your beautiful voice.
Can you
Let's
see?
we can
Okay,
get you
wait.
pinned up.
Okay, wait.
We are excited to have Honorable Holly J. Mitchell.
Who's desperately trying to get her camera on? Can you see me now? Can you see me now?
Let's see.
We can see you.
See you now. Los Angeles County Supervisor District 2.
Thank you.
And then I believe we also have Dr. Scorza joining us, yes?
That is correct.
Awesome, thank you. They will both be sharing information with the committees on utilizing data tools specifically to equitably allocate funds. And Supervisor Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Scorza, for being here to share your insights with us. So Supervisor Mitchell, handing it over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and discuss the important yet for some currently unpopular idea of what I call baking equity and data into how we make policy decisions. But that's what that's what we've been doing here in LA County, and that's what we're gonna continue to do. And so I appreciate having the opportunity to join with Dr. Scorza, who is the master architect of how we make it happen here at LA County. And so I was asked to kind of just walk you through or share how we've done it here at LA County, where we really try to, as I said, bake equity in. For those of you that don't know, I know this is the statewide commission. I'm serve on the LA County Board of Supervisors, was elected in 2020 during COVID. Got here, I was like, wow, what a time for me to join local government with these federal dollars rolling directly to local government to be able to do some things. So we look at the ARPA dollars, we looked at how the federal government wanted them to be used. And I then began to kind of look at the culture of my own organization, and wanted to benefit from the fact that prior to joining the board had taken a very aggressive action and declared that, you know, anti-Blackness was a problem in the county, created ARTI, of which Dr. Scorza leads, which really kind of set the framework for us to begin to think differently about equity and how we use an equity tool to allocate dollars. I believe last year you heard from members of my team and Dr. Scores about how the county was intentionally investing our just under $2 billion American Rescue Act plan dollars with this lens. It was focused on driving economic mobility for historically disadvantaged communities. Because my goal was always, as was our then president, to build back better. And I was going to use this opportunity and these resources to do so. And when I got to the county, I noticed a pattern of this kind of divide by five way of doing things. I think it was the politically correct, politically safe way of allocating funds. But from my perspective, COVID, frankly, the murder of Mr. Floyd gave me permission to be bold and different. And if I was going to build back better, we needed to look at communities that had been disproportionately impacted by COVID and years of oppression, So it created the opportunity to really have a different conversation. So I used that as an opening with my colleagues to really reimagine how the county could serve the public, to help everyone understand that COVID didn't impact everyone equally, because our systems, frankly, weren't equal to begin with. So we used initially the ARPA opportunity to really operationalize what Dr. Scorza had been building, and I think imagining and dreaming, based on the infrastructure he had had the opportunity to build in ARTI. And, you know, it's not easy to change. It's not easy for those of us who are elected to continue to operate in this zero-sum game mentality. If District 2 gets something, that means I didn't. And it's not easy to encourage elected policymakers to not engage in this race to the bottom. The race to the bottom is, you know, mine's the worst. I have the highest, you know, that kind of thing. But again, I just have to say, data. And I think, you know, what we were seeing on our television, COVID, really created the opportunity for us to push forward. Data doesn't lie, Mr. President. You know, data doesn't lie. It tells a story, if framed well, about systemic failures across race and class and gender and geography. And merely tracking outcomes isn't enough. In fact, from my perspective, that's even more offensive. We have this data, we're tracking outcomes, and yet we're not doing anything about it. So those were some of the arguments I think we made. Sometime the stars align, and we were able to make that change. It, of course, has always been my goal to start there with the ARPA dollars and to then transition our overall budgeting process in this same direction and with the same lens. I was at a La Casa board meeting yesterday, different conversation, but our current La Casa chair is Rex from Long Beach. And the mayor talked about their budgeting process in Long Beach, that it is done with an equity lens. And so I think that there are municipalities, certainly across this state, I'm hoping across the country, who are thinking differently about investment. And frankly, it's an opportunity, and I think it's a responsibility for policymakers when resources are scarce. When resources are scarce, and they certainly are now, that's the lens that must be used. So this week we had our own county recommended budget presented. I continue to reiterate the fact that equity is the best problem-solving policy. It helps us bring resources where the needs are the highest. And in doing so, I think it helps us continue to repair harms of the past or redress outcomes from poor policy decisions of the past. And as I sit here, I can't tell you that I'm completely confident that we will prevail, particularly given the national tone. And when we think about the effort to erase our past and ignore inequities, a part of our collective fiscal challenge is because of the federal administration's explicit bias. And knowing that governments are running scared, quite frankly, governmental entities are running scared, and are handling it in a variety of different ways. I've seen, I'm on Metro, I'm on AQMD, and both of those entities have removed the term equity from grant proposals. And are attempting to say it's not going to change our core values, but I'm like, I can't get down with that. If we fail at this game of chicken, from my perspective, as Dr. King says, it's most harmful when your friends are silent. And I don't believe, particularly in LA County, given who we are and who we represent and who we will continue to grow to be, that it's appropriate for us to be silent. So I am clear that it's going to take collective kind of bold leadership to really stand firm for our values. I am hoping that we can continue to follow the data and the infrastructure that we've put up. And when I say we, I'm not talking about just now LA County, the collective we, all of these governing bodies, that all of us figure out a way to stand firm. I'm clear that we need to be resourceful. We need to validate our allyship. So we can understand how we can identify unique and different opportunities. I think it's going to be important, as I always say, elections matter. It's going to be important that you all hold elected officials, myself included, accountable, and that we are mindful of this for every election in the short term, about the questions we ask of people, and that we have an expectation that it's not just lip service, it's not just saying the word equity, it is operationalizing it by making it a part of your funding priority. I know now, I think I've said enough. I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Scorza. He can talk a little bit more about how he implemented the board's mandate to design and measure program outcomes with, as I like to say, equity baked in, and how he operationalized the COVID Vulnerability and Equity Index, as well as the individual projects dashboard. So with that, Dr. Scorza.
Thank you so much for that, Supervisor Mitchell. I think it really is a testament to both the leadership of our supervisor as well as our board that we continue to elevate our values here in LA County, and in many ways stay the course, right, on what's right for people, what is meant to be an effort to improve outcomes for all folk, but especially for those who have been most disproportionately and disparately and inequitably harmed in our society. And so the American Rescue Plan and the implementation of the American Rescue Plan here locally was just that effort, right? It was really taking $2 billion to try and target those resources to people who are most impacted by the pandemic. So, as you heard from Supervisor Mitchell, the board created ARDI, and ARDI is known as the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative. And Really, our charge is to build out a countywide anti-racism policy agenda, but also not just saying like, here are the policies we need to drive, but here are the practices and here are the ways we go about getting it done. So you can think about ARTI as a change management policy organization that's really working with our departments to help them incorporate equity in an anti-racism policy agenda in all we do. I'm going to tell you briefly about, I'm going to show you a brief video about who we are and sort of what the county is doing and what we represent. And I'll turn it over to our presenters who are going to play you a brief video that gives you a sense of the work that we're doing here in LA County.
Is this the video that we have on the screen here? Dr. Scorza?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. We're going to see if we can get it to play. If not, we'll try to pull it up after our.
I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and skip it and we'll come back to it later.
Great. Thank you.
So as we think about the American Rescue Plan Act, and as we think about what the role of our board and our local leadership has been, really, ARPA was funding that was made available after the CARES Act to address the needs of those who were suffering disproportionately from the health and economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of us know about ARPA. We received those dollars. And it wasn't just that, Congress passed this act and the federal government at the time under President Biden passed an executive order on racial equity to make sure we got those dollars to those who are most in need. But our board also took an incredible step as well with support and leadership of those in community. There was a community coalition and organization who also advocated to make sure that the county was moving these dollars equitably. I want to thank one of your commissioners here, John Kim, who helped to drive some of that work here in the county alongside a whole host of other community-based organizations. It was really a partnership and community that said, hey, look, we need to adopt both equity principles and a formula that is going to be applied to the funding request the departments submitted, and make sure we have opportunities to be transparent and accountable to the public by identifying where the dollars are spent. So what are the contracting opportunities and what are the outcomes that we're seeing, right? So in many ways, the framework that Supervisor Mitchell in her motion sponsored and our board adopted really set up an opportunity for us to target those resources to those who are most in need, and recognizing that we didn't always have the data we needed to identify those communities, also created space for non-geographically concentrated populations. These are folk with whom we may not have sort of critical mass in order to capture that data. That could be some of our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, or our homeless population, folk who are often moved, who may not have a zip code that they're tied to. So I think in many ways, the framework of this legislative action really have to drive equity within our departments. Let's go to the next slide. The board adopted a spending plan for the roughly $2 billion that centered on 3 pillars. One was making sure that we had equity-focused investments. The other was making sure that we had a bridge to recovery. And the third one was making sure that we had fiscal stability and we're strengthening the social safety net. Not only did this effort drive investments in communities that were most impacted by the pandemic, but it called for changes in our system. And what that meant was the development of a design process that ensured that as programs were rolling out, they were, departments were building in strategies, principles, goals, outcomes, and metrics that we could track, as well as even an approach to evaluation to make sure that we knew how to use, that we were using those dollars in a way that was best benefiting those most impacted by the pandemic and beyond. But it also drove changes in our contracting processes. Our Supervisor Mitchell and other members of the board pushed for legislative actions to increase equity in the way we contract, making sure that we made contracting opportunities available for all Angelenos and those who have been historically excluded, making sure that outreach and engagement was embedded in this work and that we had data tools also available to the public. Let's go to the next slide. Through the work that our partners at Catalyst California had done, along with a coalition of organizations, we were able to adopt a statewide index and modify it for our local needs here to develop what we are calling the COVID-19 Vulnerability and Recovery Index, looking at data points or indicators that helped us identify people who were most at risk of harm from the pandemic, those who most severely impacted by the pandemic, and then those who needed the most support to recover from the impacts of the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, identified additional data points for populations that were not easy to measure through census data or other data administrative data that we may have had in the county as well. And so combined, we were able to identify folk who were most vulnerable and most in need, and then build out a funding formula to address the needs of those in our communities here in LA County. Let's go to the next slide. Now, when we did this formula, we were trying to figure out how we balance those resources to those who were in that sort of highest need tier. We had quintiles basically from highest to lowest needs. And as you can see on this in this slide, we were able to map that need to different geographies in LA County. You can see at the very, I know it's kind of small for folk, but just in general, what this tells you is that throughout the entire county, if you had the greatest need, you had sort of you were in the darkest purple communities. The lowest level of need, you were in the lightest blue communities. And what that showed was the neighborhoods where we wanted to make sure our programs got to. And as a result, we were able to design programs by developing a mapping tool to help departments understand where the need was throughout LA County. But also, we, for the public, developed another mapping tool so that they knew where the services were being provided, and a locator tool. So in other words, if there was a community that had a higher need for, housing stability supports because, obviously people lost their jobs, they couldn't pay rent, then we knew where those folk were in their neighborhoods. We were able to then work with the departments to match their housing programs to those individuals. And then we created a system to allow those individuals to reach out to those departments and ask for that support. And so all combined, it created sort of this closed loop system that enabled both residents and departments to come together to determine how they can close the gaps on those needs. I will also add that our board subsequently said we needed to focus on our immigrant populations, focus on our transgender, gender diverse and intersex communities as well. And we were able to add things like where there may be gender affirming, care, where there may be gender neutral restrooms, et cetera. So where there may be language services, language access services, and where there are opportunities to strengthen access to the resources that were being provided by the county. I'm almost done here. I'm going to give you another, let's go to the next slide. So we have these data tools, and then we also had efforts to improve outreach and language access. So we did multilingual media briefings to our local media partners, folk in different languages, and Thai and Tagalog and Korean and Spanish and other languages in the county. We did in-language grant application submissions so that folk who may have had limited English proficiency could still show up and apply for these resources. We created a centralized language services hub and a dashboard to report out on what the projects were, as well as the points of contact, so that members of the public wanted to know how to get in touch with people about these programs, they could, and a centralized contracting website that would provide notices and details for folk about all future contracting and grant opportunities that were available. Let's go to the next slide. One of the other things that I want to note that we did, and through this process, our board and their leadership directed that we expedite and reduce the contracting and procurement process. And as a result, that enabled us to mitigate the number of contracting requirements that the county had, certainly paying attention to risk, but really streamlining the contracting and procurement process so that, folk who may not have been able to vend with the county before could get their feet in the door, could take advantage of a grant or contracting opportunity as well. And we developed what we call as a master services agreement. And this is basically a master contract so that people can get qualified. And as our departments had services they would want to release to the public, it would enable more small businesses and vendors to take advantage of the solicitations coming from the county. Finally, as it relates to this effort, we partnered with Philanthropy, the California Community Foundation, the Center for Strategic Partnership here in the county, and others to create an initiative to help people get ready to be audited or to get ready to participate in the solicitation process as well. And we call that our Equitable Recovering Initiative, along with the Unified Communication and Branding Strategy. Let's go to the next slide. Now, the big thing I think is important to note is that we've begun to see some preliminary outcomes that are really positive here in LA County. First of all, not only did our board invest in 120 projects across all supervisorial districts, but we were able to increase our outreach and inform eligible businesses about these opportunities. The LA County website reached more than 3,629,000 individuals through a multilingual campaign. We were also able to launch a community navigator program that already actually operates, which has reached nearly 30,000 individuals to make sure they can get connected to programs and services in LA County. And as of February of 2025, we've awarded more than 392 agreements to over 287 small businesses, nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations totaling nearly $1.2 billion in allocated revenue. That has gone to general relief public assistance programs, to things like our indigent defense program, and to providing life and safety emergency services to folk through our alternative crisis response unit and other services to help people recover better than they had before. Let's go to the final slide, and I'll tell you a few more data points. One of the things that I think is important to note is that these dollars went to a whole host of areas, including financial stability, health and public safety, housing security and homelessness, workforce development, closing the digital divide, making sure we got food out to folk, and even helping nonprofits build capacity and resilience in the face of the economic challenges that emerged from the pandemic. Some of the programs that were made available included our Guaranteed Basic Income Program, which provided over 1,000 participants more than 1,000 monthly payments, again, championed by Supervisor Mitchell and her team. We were able to reach domestic violence recipients, independent children, providing access to grants and resources to those populations. Our tenant landlord mediation program has served over 2,500 individuals and resolved nearly 1,100 cases, keeping people in their homes. So when you think about prevention and promoting positive outcomes and navigating through our homeless crisis, these dollars really matter. We were also able to get nearly 1,300 youth in our workforce development program, and an additional 1,249 employed in our Department of Parks and Recreation's aquatics program. And finally, another highlight is our grocery voucher program served nearly 20,000 households, making sure that we mitigated the impacts of food insecurity from the pandemic. These are just, let's go to the final slide. These are just a few of the things that we've done here in LA County. If you want to learn more, happy to reach out and happy to answer any questions you may have. But I just want to highlight and acknowledge the incredible work that our board and our departments have done here to spend these dollars. And that would not have been possible without a focus on equity, right? Equity ensures that we get the resources to the right people so that they can thrive in the context of their environment. So with that being said, I'll turn it back over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Sforza. I really appreciate you. And before I allow my commissioners to put together any questions and give some initial feedback, I really would like to hear from Supervisor Mitchell, as I'm at a committee convening right now with a lot of LA healthcare providers and California providers who are really afraid around being courageous in the face of this administration. And as an official, I'd like to just, get your feedback and guidance that as a commission, what should we be looking at in terms of balancing both courageousness and pragmatism in the face of this particular administration? How should we as a commission sort of look at our role when we're in the face of such threats? And I'll let my colleagues formulate their questions and comments while the supervisor responds.
I appreciate the question. And I wish I had a definitive answer for you. The
Understood.
reality is I don't.
Fair
I
enough.
served on a panel just last week with Dr. Pastor in Sacramento, where I had my own aha moment. California Budget and Policy Project that I have presented at every year for I think their entire 30 years of existence. And I plan to say, you know what, we've been here before. And I had the data, Dr. Scorza, of the budget deficit when I was first elected to the assembly in the middle of the Great Recession. Oh, it was 26, billion this year, 19 billion, da-da-da. And fortunately for me, before our panel, I listened to the luncheon presentations by the two chairs of the budget committees, Assembly and Senate budget committees. And Senator Weiner, talked about just the hate. And he used some Star Wars analogy to describe the president, which tickled me. And it hit me. And it hit me, I think, Mr. Chair, that for my own survival, I had begun to compartmentalize what we're all experiencing. For my own survival, as a as a senior Black woman, mother of a young Black man in this country, and so I've told my staff our goal is hyperlocal. I'd put my head down in an attempt to just control what I thought I could control. And my aha moment, as I said to that audience, was, he is Bull Connor. It's not just a matter of the fiscal impact of these potential cuts, but he is coming for us. And that requires a different kind of response and strategy. Because when people come for you, you either duck and roll, look for cover, or you jump to. And I am in the place where I am ready to jump to. I am clear that, other people may not be there. But I have to tell you, Dr. Ferrer said to me 6-7 months ago, I'm afraid, and we're coming up with plans. And I told Dr. Ferrer I didn't receive that I was working more than 6 months ago now, I was working too hard to have a direct impact on the outcome of the national election. And I was a believer. That's my MO. When I go head first into a campaign, I believe. I looked at some of the data. I had an inside track. I looked at data that wasn't public, and I believed in a different outcome. So I wasn't trying to hear Dr. Ferrer. I am in a different place because we are all in a different place. So those of you who know me may know that I have a tattoo in my forearm. If you can't see it, I have tattooed in my forearm the word courage. And I think everyone's going to have their own aha moment. Am I willing to forego federal dollars to be able to stand for what's right? Absolutely. I am painfully aware what the hole that could potentially blow into our state budget and our county budget. But I think we are at a unique crossroads in our generation. And if we show any signs of acquiescing to the actions that are coming from this administration, they will continue, and we will have been a party to the dismantling of our democracy and the abuse that we are facing. So for me, that's where I have arrived. And I think I can't speak for my entire board. I have said to county council, we need to have a closed session conversation about what's it going to be. We have to give clear directions to our department heads about actions we expect that they take in these contractual arrangements. And then we, the electeds, have to provide them with the appropriate cover. That the decision has come is a policy one, and that's in my lane. And so Dr. Scorza knows that he is to continue to move forward. As my chief of staff says, proceed until apprehended. I think Dr. Ferrer, mental health, all of our departments should be following the vision of a county that passed motions declaring that we were going to be anti-racist, to create a department, to fund a department that has influenced the way in which we do our work. That's my raw truth. And I can't speak to my colleagues on the board of whether they're there yet or not.
Well, before I allow my colleagues to ask any questions and for Dr. Scorza to give some comments as well, I will just say my bias of being a District 2 resident and knowing who my supervisor is of the last 5 years, my supervisor has spoken. But Dr. Scorza, do you have any reactions to Supervisor Mitchell? And then colleagues, we have 15 minutes for Q&A.
And unfortunately, Dr. Scorza is not a District 2 resident, but
Well,
we will forgive him. We'll forgive him. We'll forgive
it's where
him.
I'm from. So
That's right. That's right.
Nobody's,
but I will say, to Supervisor Mitchell's point, I'm going to add these two pieces. First, for all the folk that have been changing their names and doing all that stuff, what we are seeing is that they're still going after him, right? The change in the name, the renaming, the rewriting, doing all that has not stopped them from coming. We see it with these law firms that have struck these deals. Now their backs are against the wall, thinking that, hey, I thought I got out of it, but now the terms of the deals are changing. We're seeing it in so many places. So to me, the idea is that if we don't have our guardrails up, who's to say it won't change later? Who's to say it won't get worse later? Who's to say it's not going to take more out of us than we're willing to give? But once you give up that first one, it's hard to go back.
It is.
So, I could not be more proud to be under the leadership of this board and especially Supervisor Mitchell, because I think it really speaks to courage that it takes to do this work. And I know, as Supervisor Mitchell said, we are acutely aware of the potential impacts it could have, and I will do what the board tells me to do. And I'm also really proud that they're telling me to do what I'm doing now.
Jay, I'd like to give my colleagues on the committee, Commissioner Onodera, Commissioner Kim, Commissioner Bowles, if you have any questions over the next 10 to 12 minutes. Yeah, Commissioner.
So thank you, Supervisor Mitchell and Dr. Scorza. Supervisor Mitchell has a very clear sense of how I feel about her. So I appreciate you coming into this and spending some time. I've been asking the similar question that Commissioner Maldonado asked about how we need to show up right now as a commission, as a state commission, charged with helping to build a framework around racial equity for the state of California. And, everyone's got whether people know it or not, we all got a target on our back right now. And this commission might have a bigger one just because of, what the framework is. And so getting you to come to the larger commission at some point would be, I mean, I would advocate strongly that you come to this, but at some point we need that courage and that conviction that you shared here for the larger commission, I think. In terms of the topic at hand around budget equity and the extraordinary work you and Artie did to lead this fight around the ARPA dollars being more equitably put together. What I had noticed, we have done this work with you all at the county. We had done this work with LAUSD. We had done this work with a lot of jurisdictions. And it takes a champion, an elected champion,
It does.
and it takes the right infrastructure. Like if we didn't have Dr. Scorza and Artie right there,
Right.
when we were thinking, okay, if we do this motion and we get it passed, where's it going to land? And
Right.
it could have gone to wrong places. And then it takes, partnership with department leadership to kind of roll with that centralized capacity. So, I mean, at some point, I would love maybe Dr. Scorza.
And it takes follow-up, Mr. Kim.
That's right. That's right.
Follow-up. So there
Exactly
are
right.
departments who've been a little slower than others, and so all of a sudden I meet with them quarterly. So it takes ongoing handholding.
You and your staff have told me about the follow-up, which is I find extraordinary that you're doing that. And so I guess during the setting up, the getting the motion passed, you talked about the tensions and the back and forth with your colleagues to get to a place of agreement. And what would you advise for an elected official? Like, what is it? How do you get prepared for that fight? How do you get that prepared to implement equity and for that fight that may be required? Because what we build as a framework, as a racial equity framework, it's going to have to get picked up by some elected officials to champion. And so to those future champions to say, hey, we want to pick up part of this and implement it somewhere in the state, at the state level, what is your advice to them?
In a weird sort of way, maybe this is another moment like COVID was. I use the Bull Connor example because Bull, that image on those black and white TVs was the first time the entire world could not deny that they were using water hoses and dogs on human beings because everybody saw it. COVID and Mr. Floyd, everybody saw racism, police brutality, systemic inequity. Everybody saw it. Maybe this is one of those opportunities. Because since he's coming for everybody, maybe this is the time for everybody to get that and form the kind of connection and allyship we really honestly never have before. The civil rights movement, it was, blacks versus with a couple of sympathetic whites, the Jewish leaders, abolition, you know what I mean? We've never, and Professor Pastor, you correct me, I don't know that we've ever had a true rainbow coalition as Jesse envisioned. Maybe this is our opportunity. So maybe this is the opportunity because every elected official has a constituency that looks like somebody on this box, on this Zoom. Might not be too many of me in their district, but they're gonna have some Manuel's, they're gonna have some of somebody on this Zoom. And since they are coming for all of us, maybe this is the time. And I hadn't thought about that till just now.
Thank you, Supervisor.
I can't tell
And
if
so
I'm
then
on a
our
commission
job is
call.
to help elected officials understand that.
Well, I cannot
It's
tell if
happening to
I'm on
your constituents.
This is both a commission call and an organizer call, and I appreciate that call to action from the supervisor for sure. Commissioner Bowles, Commissioner Pastor, Commissioner Onodera in that order, please.
You're on mute.
I lowered my hand and in my mind, I took myself off mute. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Supervisor Mitchell and Dr. Scorsa. This question could get misconstrued because of this context, this conversation we've been having. My question was, do you believe in order to have the impact and the change in how we bring equity into our decisions, you needed a LA County Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion office to see that work through, as
Absolutely.
opposed to defining a system as functioning well. We don't need to meet with Supervisor Mitchell to make sure we're doing our jobs. It's actually built into the system, and that's the definition of a working system. Is we don't have to have a separate office. There are people who would like to see a separate office of racial equity, and I think there's legitimate and valid arguments to that. There's also a world in which if the system isn't serving the people most in need, it's not serving. And so you don't need a separate office to make sure that happens. You have accountability, you have KPIs, you have whatever it has, but if it's not serving those people, it's actually not working. And so what I worry about is that when we have designated offices, anyone can come in. We're seeing it happen now and say, you know what, we don't need that office anymore. But if it's actually integrated and part of how we do business, then it makes it more challenging to do that. So I'm wondering if you all are able to see, you know, we have thankfully been able to move a lot of this forward, like you said, in this moment, and use the COVID moment to, you know, implement changes and systems that we weren't able to, or that, you know, we could be much more effective in light of those circumstances. But I wonder if you all have a sense of whether now these changes are institutionalized, they are integrated, and will live on regardless of whether we have a separate office or not.
So I'm so glad you raised that question, because I think there's truth in both sides. We needed the office. We needed a Mitchell to initiate, make it happen. I needed a Dr. Scorza to do the data, to do all that stuff he made happen. You know, I'm a policymaker. I introduced the bill. I'm supposed to do this and move on. I needed a Dr. Scorza to create the data and create the story, the visual story for all of my colleagues to understand. I probably represent more Latino immigrants in the 2nd district than my colleague in the 1st district actually does. All of us needed to understand that my colleague in the 5th district has poverty levels rivaling the 2nd district. You know, it's hard to erase old tapes. We believe what we believe about these communities. And so the data helps us see, no, this is LA County today. So the way I talk about it's got to be baked in, not sprinkled on top. Our ultimate goal is for Dr. Scorza to work himself out of a job. But it had to be housed someplace where that was the person's sole job. He is then a resource. So he is written into so many other motions in our effort to make sure other motions and other departments are considering equity. He is then written in as the go-to person to check to bring the data. So in a bureaucracy the size of LA County, in a bureaucracy with the history of any bureaucracy, where we had to go back in Bruce's Beach and fix what we had fucked up 100 years ago, it's going to take a strike. So Artie is the strike. Are we yet at a place where we can go away? No. Are we much further along than we were in 2020? Yes. Can every department head and everybody define equity and not confuse equity with equality? Yes. Is there unequal application across the departments? Yes. But we're getting there. And so you need a department, but the department shouldn't think that they are settling in and hold all the work and all the data to create longevity for themselves. Artie is designed to bake it in. So if Artie exists or not, there's experience, there's knowledge, there's a sense of personal accountability that Dr. Scores has helped create at the county. You follow me?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Gabriel, you're on mute.
I'm going to ask Commissioner Pastor to go ahead and go on with his question. We're going to try and get through this in the next 3 minutes if we can, 3 to 4 minutes.
So, 2 questions, but they'll be short. First, Supervisor Mitchell is really cool and very poetic, but she is also a complete nerd. And I lift that up because I think this culture of data is really important, and how you get other political figures to be as actually interested in the facts. And then second, there's something else you said, Supervisor Mitchell, which is think about equity not as a special interest, but as a problem-solving strategy that benefits almost all of us. And I think those 2 things are crucial for the Racial Equity Commission to take away: the culture of data and the argument that this is not a special interest. In fact, working class people of any ethnicity will benefit if we target these issues. For Dr. Scorza, very quickly, we did a evaluation of the cap and trade dollars. And one of the hardest things for us to do was to track where they were spent. So can you say a word about that? Because it's like the dollars are like, we spent them. But like, where did they arrive? And who did they actually benefit? That must have been a big data job, disentangling that. So if you could both comment quickly.
Sure, yeah, I'll be quick. And Candace, I think to your question earlier, I think you need both. I think it's a both and, to Supervisor Mitchell's point. You need both to bake it in, but you also need support to help drive the work forward. And you need folk to be there to be ready to respond in moments like this when folk are trying to turn back the hands of time. So I think it's a both and I love Supervisor Mitchell's point about working ourselves out of a job, right? Because ultimately it should not be necessary. So I think that aspiration is really important. To your question, Dr. Pastor, that was hard. I'm just gonna be honest with you. It's been hard to track where money goes to, because in a system the size of LA County with a budget of nearly $48 billion, you have to have the right systems in place. So I will just, in a moment of candor, there was a lot of institution and like the stuff that I didn't talk to you about was all of the APIs we had to build in the background between our accounting folk and our auditor controller and our human resources folk, all the codes you have to use to track where those dollars are going when somebody's time is being spent on a specific project. Being able to pull that stuff out and show exactly sort of what neighborhoods it went to and or who it's going to, especially if as a system we're incredibly decentralized. So departments do their own contracting, right? So the amount of time and energy it takes just to report and answer that one question, folk would sort of not realize, right? It's like trying to get a whole bunch of people together who have their own systems and say, okay, let's pull all that information together and then interpret it and roll it up. So, I am proud to say that that we're able, at the very least, to track where dollars are being spent. We have some preliminary data and reports that sort of speak to that. And we can show that at least at this moment, roughly 75% of the dollars that we're able to capture went predominantly or overwhelmingly to the communities that are most impacted by the pandemic. And so, there's, some monies are spent internally and all these other dynamics, probably too much detail for you here. But the answer to your question is it's a lot of hard work to do that, but we are able to put out some early signs on where those dollars have gone, and I'm really proud of what that shows.
So for the commission, I really want to underscore this because it's a thing that needs to happen with state systems, number one. Number two, in a world in which we cannot use race as a category, geography is incredibly important, and it actually gets where people live. So it's something that we just need to be paying a lot of attention to what Dr. Scorza and his team have been able to do.
And if I could just add on the backside, I agree with everything Dr. Scorza said. I always do. And that doesn't happen by accident. That's what defines a bureaucracy. People who rule the bureaucracy, that's how they maintain power. So it's not just, it's not built that way, it's so big. Sometimes it's by design, maybe not by design, but the people who are there now benefiting from it, but it was set up that way at some point because it's about power. So we should know that as we go in to try to peel back those onion layers to build up the infrastructure around honest to goodness transparency.
And I think what that speaks to quickly is what it has also informed, and what you all may be wanting to know, is how are we leveraging this for the future? We have launched an effort to streamline data, to start centralizing contracts, to create a common taxonomy, a common language that all of our departments use to define programs and tag their programs to prevention or COVID or whatever, or student services, or like that work. ARP has really accelerated a lot of internal systems development to enable us to do this, as Supervisor Mitchell, across the entire budget.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, Commissioner Maldonado, this other point about infrastructure and jumping in terms of you can move dollars to a neighborhood, but if you don't have outreach capacity in language so that people will come get those services, right? So the matter that ARPA had kind of turned the river a little bit and put more of that outreach capacity, that those relationships, that kind of thing, so that those people can come back the next time something is offered that may not be specifically tuned to equity, but you've turned the river a little bit. And so I just wanted to note that was a critical outcome for ARPA as well.
And the beauty of that was the expectation of the federal government for those dollars in the first place. So we were invited to the White House. Dr. Scores and I were bumping into each other on planes and airports at NACO because the White House said, LA County got it. Could you come explain to these other people?
Yeah.
Which also probably makes what we're experiencing now all the more offensive.
Yeah. Because
we had gotten to this unique place and now in one election cycle, it's been reversed. That was the intent, that was their vision and intention, and we delivered.
Well, I want to give Commissioner Onodera the final question or comment before we go to public comments, and then we're going to take a 10-minute break to let everybody breathe and digest this amazing panel. So, Commissioner Onodera.
Thank you, Commissioner Maldonado. One, I really wanted to thank Supervisor Mitchell and Dr. Scorza for this presentation and for really moving me today. Sometimes, in all the hustle bustle of everything, it's a lot. So thank you for making me take a second moment and pause and really remember why we're all here. Actually, the question that I had, Dr. Scorza brought up about how you folks are leveraging what you have done, because I know that if we want to sort of translate this into something that's going to happen in our state, folks are also going to be looking to what that's going to look like going forward. So Dr. Scorza, I think you kind of already did touch on how you folks are leveraging this to go forward. But if you have anything more you wanted to add, I know we're short on time, but I know folks here in the state would also be very interested to understand what that's going to look like.
No, absolutely. I think, that's a great question. I think there are a lot of incredible folk that have contributed to this work, right? And I appreciate Supervisor Mitchell saying that this is how our systems have been designed, right? There was an exhibit years ago called Undesign the Red Line that was being led by Enterprise Community Partners and some others, who are like, we have to redesign how we do this work or rethink how we do this work. And so I would invite folk design was an incredibly important part of all that we did. Designing the ARP grant portals, designing the dashboards, design for equity, right? Design, not just for equity, design for liberation, right? design for a future that you want. And anticipate, and I'll tell you just quickly where we're at now, where I'm at personally, but also in the work that we're doing is we're starting to think about how we design for uncertainty, right? Design for the moments where you're going to receive the pushback, where you know it's going to be a challenge. When I got hired almost 5 years ago here in the county, I was talking to our CEO and we were like, you know, we know, like, the history has shown us this is coming. So design preparing for the pushback and be ready, you know, for that work. So like I said, I that's a lesson that I would invite our state partners to consider. The other, I think, component is to never lose sight of the fact that even though we're working in a bureaucracy, it's going to require the very strong will of staff that are committed to this work to push against those systems that exist, because the system is not designed to do what we're trying to do. And it, you know, it requires a lot of partnership and collaboration. And sometimes, you know, I don't even want to use the word struggle, but really getting people to get on the same page, that change management piece cannot be underestimated. We had more than 200 workshops with departments when we were rolling this thing out. I met with a department, I can meet with departments 15 departments a day to just go through this work. The amount of work that it took to do this is not for the faint at heart. So I invite us to do that. One final thing I'll share with you all, and this is for the benefit of those of you who asked this question. Just so you can see the results of what this looks like, this shows you, this is not all of our data, but this just shows you where the dollars, where some of the contracts were spent, where the encumbrances were, where contracts went, and you can see the relationship between those contracts. And the darker shade neighborhoods are where the greatest impacts of the pandemic were. So when I say design, what I am saying, this is not everything where the data has to be updated. It takes months sometimes to get that data. Eventually, when this is all said and done, we'll go and show you where most of these dollars went. But what this shows you here is that dollars, you can see the concentration of those resources, but dollars went to neighborhoods that were most impacted by the pandemic. And so you got to make this happen, you got to have foresight, you got to prepare for that. Because if you don't do that, this is not going to happen. So I'll end by saying that.
Well, I appreciate you both. We're only just a few minutes over, so it's, you know, no need to overly rush, but we need to keep moving. I want to say thank you to Dr. Scorza and thank you to Supervisor Mitchell. Dr. Scorza, this is like the 4th time I've heard you speak, and I'm always educated, illuminated, and inspired when I hear you talk, so thank you. Commissioners, are there any final questions that you all have that are burning before we move to public comments?
Not a question, but a point. So the Supervisor Mitchell said, and was illustrated in the map that Dr. Scorza showed, sometimes poverty and distress is not where you think. So you go up to the Antelope Valley, you go into the Inland Empire, you go into different parts of the state that people are not highlighting, or maybe where there's not activism yet, so that people pay attention. The needs are there. And that's why data is so important. So that we love our squeaky wheels, but so it's not just where there's organizing that attention is paid.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. So we will now take any public comments related to agenda item number 4, the presentation from data to focused allocations, best practices and tools in LA County discussion. Jordan, can you please let us know, or Augustine, if there are any public comment that are at this time?
Thank you, Commissioner Maldonado. At this moment, I do not see any online public comments. Are there any in-person public comments?
There are no in-person public comments.
Okay.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate everyone, and Supervisor Mitchell, again, as my supervisor of the last 5 years, I appreciate you. And to Dr. Scorza, thank you so much. We're now going to take a 10-minute break, and we will be back.
Thank you, Supervisor.
5:30. Thank you all so much.
All right, I think we are all starting to come back, and we're going to transition a little bit. I'm going to ask Commissioner Pastor to facilitate the second half of our meeting, and we'll kick it off with our presentation on data standards by Jason Lally, and then transition to our discussion and dialogue after that presentation. So, Commissioner Pastor.
Oh, thank you. And this is a shift in the agenda for those following. We're actually going to do agenda item 7 on data standards before agenda item 6, discussion of key themes that will allow us to wrap in themes from both presentations. This is a opportunity to learn about states' suggested data standards that are being developed by the Office of Data and Innovation, and I hope that we are this office will learn as much from this presentation we just heard as we did. We're joined today by Jason Lally, Chief Data Officer at the Office of Data and Innovation. Jason gave us a preview of the data standards and a very nice discussion of data ethics and community-based data generation in July 2024. So, Jason, thank you for being here with us again. Please provide us an update.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm very, very, very happy to be here. That first presentation, not only inspiring, but incredibly linked to what I'll be talking about today with you. So before I get into the meat of the presentation, I'm going to cover the data standard, what it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of guiding practices, best practices and guidance, and how we're approaching that, and then our adoption approach to the standard. But before I get into that, I want to give a little bit about me, the Office of Data Innovation, and a little bit about that background to ground some of the stuff I'll talk about. One of the things that struck me in the presentation just now, the panel, is that there are remarkable and important similarities, not between some of the lived experiences I have had that have informed a lot of the work that I do. By no means do I have the same experience, but I'm the state's chief data officer appointed by the governor. I serve within the Office of Data and Innovation. I report to our director, Director Marino, who has a vision around making sure we can improve the experience of our residents, the customer experience, if you will. But customer in this regard refers to whoever we may serve in government. So sometimes those customers are internal, sometimes they are our residents. And actually, we do need to think about both in order to move things forward. And so the standard is really about kind of threading those things together. And it's really important to me because I also had an interesting COVID moment, as a lot of us did. I was serving as the city and county of San Francisco's chief data officer at the time. I was appointed 10 days before the declaration of emergency in San Francisco. So my plans changed. And what those plans morphed into was really leveraging all of the work we had done prior to the COVID emergency around open data. And we pointed open data at that challenge. We provided data at the most granular level we could, at the neighborhood level. My people on my team worked with our Department of Public Health at the city to make sure that because you can publish data at certain levels of granularity if you follow HIPAA Rule 2. So we did the work that we needed to do to go lower than the county level to the neighborhood level to inform conversations that were happening in communities with community members. We weren't out there in the community, but we were connected to the folks who were, and they would come back and they would tell us, this is the stuff that they don't understand. This is what's not working. And then we would look and adjust things like, how do we explain the data better? How do we make it more simple? How do we explain really, really complex things like, why do the numbers change 2 days prior? Because there's all sorts of fun things that are happening in the back end, like data going to the state through fax machines. That's a thing still. So anyway, that time, at the time, I didn't realize that it was setting me up for some of the work that I'm doing now. The echoes are very remarkable with the fires in LA. A different kind of an emergency, but nonetheless, and very there's a lot of hallmarks of it that are very similar to what we had to do during COVID, and we were able to do some things, leveraging some of the things that I had learned in that time to try to apply what I learned there to this larger issue. And the standard for me, independent of all of that, was always, even before everything happened, was about connecting people's actual lived experiences to the way in which we make decisions about all sorts of things, program design, funding decisions, those kinds of things. And a standard can feel really like back end, kind of not important, but for me, and believe me, I've seen standards that sit on shelves and don't go anywhere. I've seen policies that don't. And the thing that my aha, and the thing that I really connected a bit ago, and that I was very happy to hear folks working on this in LA, including Supervisor Mitchell, that the nexus between the vision and the how is the thing, and the standard is part of that nexus. The idea is really for us to find a way that we can help to create some consistency across programs, and really improve the way we measure and analyze. And the standard is just the starting point. It's not the end point. I'll talk more about what I mean by that. But you know, the last thing I'll say just about my own experience is that when I came to San Francisco, I came as I don't want to say I was escaping, but I grew up on the East Coast. Lovely family, love that city. Live Philadelphia, where the region that I grew up in. But San Francisco really called to me. It was a place, at least for me, where being queer was not as hard. Certainly, San Francisco has its challenges, but what happened for me as an individual level was that when I was able to show up to work at the city and not even bat an eyelash about who I was, I could grow, I could expand in a way that I couldn't in other places. And this is something that I realize more now than I did then, but the notion of even identity and how we identify, part of it is it's an important bridge. It's important to understand all of our lived experiences. And then when we understand them and we feel safe in that understanding, then actually people can begin to step into their voices. And that was the thing that took a little while for me, because there were all sorts of things that were unconscious that I didn't realize that like my partner one time a while ago, before COVID, he mentioned to me once, and it was a little aha moment for me at the time. He's like, he overheard me in a meeting and he's like, it's so funny. Your voice goes down like 2 registers when you get on a call with somebody. that you work with. And I was like, oh, do I? And, that was the beginning of like recognizing a little bit of morphing into other spaces so I could be accepted. There's stuff that even though San Francisco was welcoming, there was still stuff I had to clear out. But I was in a city and in a place where I could do that work, and have done that work and continue to do that work. So this standard is much more for me than something on paper. It is something that to be operationalized. And I'm really proud that I work in a department called the Office of Data and Innovation, where we put data and innovation together, and they do work together, because data represent the world, but we all know that we have imperfect data. So we need to be thoughtful and careful about how do we deal with things like missingness of data. What does that mean? Is it going out and finding the perfect data set, or are there other methods to reach hard to reach populations where actually a different approach would suffice, would actually get us further faster, rather than we're waiting for the perfect data set to explain everything. And so you saw earlier, different models being applied to different data to start to get a better picture. Is it a perfect picture? Maybe, maybe not, but it's better than anything that you have if you're just making guesses. And the other thing that data does for us, even in its imperfection, is if we use it to ask questions of it, rather than try to just find the solution, that can actually be really illuminating. So when you see that, you have a hunch that your data aren't representing the community, and all you need is a hunch. I mean, you don't need to do a whole lot of analysis. You can just look around sometimes and just be like, this data set doesn't really match what I'm seeing. So you have that hunch, and then if you've got data analysts, you can say, well, can you explore this hunch I have? And they'll look at it. They'll look at the data we have, look at other sources, and then they can come back and say, well, this is what I'm seeing, and maybe this is the way forward, and maybe we can do this and that. And that's the power of like a data professional, analytics professional, working well with a program and policy leaders. And it's a system. It's not a straight line. And what we are doing is really trying to not just create the foundation, but then also provide the support. You heard that earlier as well, reflected in the first panel, where again, totally a believer in this, that the way you move forward on standards and policies is you figure out operationally, how do you operationalize it? How do you bake it in? And again, not a straight line, but it can be a principle that you hold and you keep doing it. And the way that we go about it is design, test, iterate, keep going. And then build the community around you to keep making it better. So I'll jump into the first part, which is I'm really proud to say that we did release the standard. It was published on March 19th. It is available, the URL on the slide, which I can read out loud for those that need that. It's hub.hub.innovation.ca.gov/data/standard. There's a QR code as well. You can scan that. But this is the document. This is the document that hopefully won't just be a document. That I have I'm not going to let that happen. And I don't want this to sit on a shelf. There's a reason it's even on a public website. So it's not sitting somewhere tucked away in a PDF. There's a bit of accountability baked into that. And so with the standard, we're really establishing the sort of foundation, and it was really based on a lot of the work that the federal government did, The Census Bureau and through SBD 15 at OMB convened a number of folks. The Census Bureau being one of the largest groups that really does statistics at scale at the federal level. So they were developing this, and California was following closely along. All along the way, we were actually asked by Governor Newsom through the equity executive order that established the Racial Equity Commission to develop this standard. And so our approach was to not reinvent the wheel, to make sure that we are tracking closely to what the feds are doing, because at that time, especially, we didn't have a Trump in the administration. We didn't have folks who were trying to tear down some of these things. But at that time, there's incredible research, there's the folks at the census that we collaborated with, very thoughtful and really aligned to the way we were thinking about this anyway. And so the data standard contains 4 important changes from previous data collection standards. First, it sets the standard that race and ethnicity are collected in a combined question rather than as a 2-part question. What this does is what was found is that by separating out race and ethnicity into 2 parts, it gets very confusing. People don't know how to identify within that. So the idea there is to simplify in such a way that people can express exactly how they are in the standard. The second thing is it establishes the need for multi-select capabilities. So what that means is really it enables respondents to select as many options as apply to how they identify. So there's not like a category where you're like multi-race. You just express any number of categories. That can be a back-end thing. We don't need people to do that work. They just need to really express how they feel they identify. Third, it adds a top-level demographic category for Middle Eastern and North African representation. This tracks also with the federal standard. And fourth, it requires detailed category data collection, meaning that within the top-level demographic categories, there will be collection of more specific and granular data. Additionally, we also conducted extensive research and outreach to ensure that California's standard reflects the diversity of our population. So the detailed categories, for example, so at the federal level, they establish a set of detailed categories that are based on national. So we applied the California lens on what those initial detailed categories would be, and you can still express in a write-in whatever you want to express. However, what this does is it increases response rates. Because essentially you've got the highest number of folks represented in that. This can be tailored in terms of the initial standard, it's sort of statewide, and of course you could tailor those kinds of things based on the study, the research, et cetera, based on the sort of region, those kinds of things. So it's meant to be flexible, but the initial standard kind of sets that high level California-wide set of categories. Also, it includes not just 6, but in certain cases there are there's legislation that explicitly requires the collection of certain categories. So those categories are also included in our list. And that's a difference from the federal standard. So in certain cases, there will be more than 6 because of that. We also engaged communities across California to refine terminology in data collection questions and align to those recommendations they provided. Specifically, we added additional options for detailed groups within the American Indian and Alaskan Native category to improve the quality of data collection within these often undercounted communities. We conducted statistical testing and focus group interviews with Afro-Latino identifying communities to understand the impact of the combined race and ethnicity question on multiracial or ethnic groups. So, this is the nuance of these standards is that if you've always been answering a survey a certain way and it changes, well, what is that going to do in terms of the response rates and those kinds of things? And so just really looking at that carefully to try to design for that. And it's not always just about the standard, it's also about making sure this goes to the implementation late as we move this forward, is really helping communities understand what the changes mean for them, and why this. So that formative research helps us ground some of that that kind of work that needs to happen. And finally, we did conduct user research interviews with data subject matter experts within state departments to understand priorities and needs of their work when it comes to demographic data collection analysis. And so I mentioned earlier, we serve sort of two sides at ODI. We are really an internal department trying to help government do the things that they do more efficiently, effectively, with greater equity. And in talking to state staff, one thing we do is we bring them along and we also hear from them, okay, what's the other side of this challenge? What's the side of collecting this information so that we can take all of that into account? And we've also done a little bit of testing that we'll continue to do on just even question framing to increase response rates. With what we found with race and ethnicity is that the plain language framing statement didn't actually have a marked difference in response rates. And our hypothesis there is that because this is data that's collected so often, there's a higher level of trust than in other categories of identity that we were looking at, such as sexual orientation, gender identity. So where we found that those plain language framing statements of how might this data be used increase response rates. That said, one of our principles at ODI is to use plain language when collecting. So no matter what, we want to have plain language statements. And so there will be some inquiry over that over time as we kind of see how folks are responding and whether that influences any changes to the way that things are framed, or any best practices there at least. We probably won't necessarily say you have to put it this way, because we do want to maintain some flexibility that you may need to frame it a different way depending on the survey. But we want to make sure we provide guidance that's useful to folks implementing these surveys. So that's work to be done, work that's being done. And one of the things I'll get into now is really talking about best practices and guidance and how we're thinking about the implementation of this, because these changes definitely don't happen overnight. That doesn't mean that they don't have to happen at all or wait forever. But when you think about a very large legacy system that's been collecting data a certain way, and it's got a lot of challenges with procurement, whatever it might be, that may be a little bit harder. But when you're talking about a survey, or maybe even just an analysis on existing data that maps onto the new standard, those are things that you can do relatively quickly with guidance, support, etc. So we're holding that tension, and we're using the fact that there are so many spaces where this data can be collected that we can learn from that, so that we can inform those larger system changes. If we go actually back to this the slide just before this one of the things I want to just say is, just as an example, is that what you're seeing on the screen here is the question implemented. Actually, the story behind this is that the Office of Data Innovation is also involved in a development of a program called Engage California. The timing was perfect, where we were launching the program just as the standard was being approved. And so very rapidly, we implemented the statewide standard on the platform that we were using currently for this first phase of what we call agenda setting, where we're trying to understand what people are concerned about in the LA recovery and where they want to go in the future, and looking to design intentional community processes later, where we can dig in deeper to things where consensus may need to be reached, where tricky things need to be balanced. But what we're doing here right now is at least beginning to collect the data of who is showing up. We're doing our best to make all sorts of outreach to ensure we get as many people in there as possible. And we also know that there are communities that might not get into this phase. So that I often talk about this. We used to do participatory design way back in Denver when I designed public engagement processes for cities and regions who were doing urban planning. They were thinking about the future. And one of the principles we said is we always collected demographic data across any kind of our engagements. And then we were tracking not just who was in the room, but who wasn't in the room. And so that's what really this is about, is at least at this stage, is seeing both. And that goes back to the point I made about looking at data in a way where you can ask it questions as well as find solutions or answers. So the question we can ask the data is, okay, we know roughly the LA population. We don't need a special analysis per se. Yes, there are certain communities that we need to be mindful of that may not be showing up in some of the data we that is available administratively. But we know enough to know where there might be gaps in that participation that can inform, that deeper dive where we really do want to make sure that community is in the room. What does that mean, and all of that? So this is part of designing toward that. So I'm very proud to say we did it. We implemented it in a day or so, and got it off and running. And this was a happy accident. But what we can do now is really starts to actually, again, accidentally kind of attach onto our adoption strategy, which if you go to the next slide, what's on this screen here is the standard survey. This is just sort of in a survey format. If you go into the guidance and read through it, it doesn't have to look like this. This is an exemplar, and based on the work that the census did. But the idea is that actually, you could be collecting this data in a digital form. You could be collecting this data in person. There's a number of different ways that the data can be collected. So this is just one sort of starting point for people to start to wrap their heads in this visually. But in terms of our approach to adoption, essentially
Jason, can you close in about a minute?
Yeah, I'll wrap up. This is actually, I'm all done. The adoption, essentially what we'll be doing is we have a lot of early adopters, people we've been working with for a while on just fleshing out the standard. And we're going to be working with them to, and it's a cross section of folks. Some people have surveys, some people have analyses that they want to map on. So we'll be doing, my team will be working with those sort of early adopters to kind of flesh out and understand like how they might apply it, so that we can inform the development of toolkits and guidance, and then go to the next level of scale using those examples that essentially could feed the guidance and toolkit that would be built on top of the standard. So the standard is the standard, but then we want to make sure that there's enough programmatic support and guidance so that people can implement it. And really the call to action is to go ahead and please check it out. Feel free to share. The standard is public. Feel free to share widely. And I was just on a state chief data officer call earlier today, and one of my peers said, "Oh, we're looking at your standard, and we're looking at that." And one of the things that I'm very happy we're in a position to be in right now is that the federal government is going to do whatever they're going to do, but California can at least bear this torch until hopefully we get some inspired leadership in the White House. And with that,
Thank you, Jason. And that did raise a set of issues, because this is the kind of standard that was recommended for the census until the Trump administration rejected it, so we could collect data more poorly during Trump 1.0. And so, of course, there are worries. I know that Commissioner Maldonado has them with regard to how we're going to align with the federal government, moving away from rigorous data collection. But with that, let me see if there's any comments or questions from commissioners. After that, we're going to open up to public comment. Then we'll come back with Dr. Estes to hear about legislative proposals, public comment, and then end. So I raised one issue, and I don't think we need to address it necessarily. Any questions from other commissioners?
No, I just had my question on, I'm here in DC right now with a lot of providers from across the US, and everyone is taking very drastic measures to protect ourselves in the wake of this administration. And part of that includes the erasure of data. I mean, frankly, I just want to be direct. I mean, like that's the fear of like some of our trans folks in the community and the both non-citizens and those that are undocumented, both fearing, so how do you see data collection potentially changing from a social justice lens? And how do you think we should conceptualize that? Or I know I'm asking you unknowns, that a crystal ball that you don't have, but if you were to imagine the worst, how do you might see that changing, and how should we might conceptualize?
Yep. Yeah, and Dr. Pastor, does your because I think these link a little bit, your question about the essentially it's similar in that vein, right? It's the feds have done a thing, we're doing something similar. How is this, what's in the space in between, basically? Like what are we, there's valid concerns there, so I want to make sure I address those, but is that fair?
Yes, the only thing I would add, this is actually to Commissioner Maldonado's question, is it is a question of social justice and who gets seen, but it's also just a question of accuracy. And like, I've got some values, and I've got social justice values, but I also have these values about like facts and that they count and you should collect them. And anyway.
Yeah. So these are all very important points. And actually, when we were working on this, essentially, we really had to think very hard about that in November. And because the initial intention of tracking with the federal government makes a lot of sense, and in many ways it still does. So, and I want to qualify that with what's actually happening right now. And so the tension that we are all holding is making sure we don't overreact, and then data just disappears, and then we can't serve our communities in California, and we're not giving away data for the use for harmful purposes. And this is a tension that I get to hold in my role. And the way that we're holding it right now is, well, one is proactively being engaged with other state leaders, academic institutions, talking about just this issue, and getting and seeking guidance from folks who are out in the field, kind of feeling around on what's real, what's not real, what do we have to worry about, to make sure we right size our approach in terms of data protection. And I don't think we need to be going erasing data to protect residents' data. There may be nuance, there may be things that we have to figure out and consider, but I don't have all the answers on that. But I do have the principle that tension can be held, and the way that we hold that is by bringing more people in, not just within the state of California, but from the outside, because we are not, as we said earlier, he's coming after everybody. So there's a willing community of folks across the country that are all holding this concern, and we're all talking to make sure we serve all of our residents the best. Even though states differ, there's a lot of similarities as well. So there's a lot we can learn from each other. So there's this aspect of protection and looking at the laws. There was an executive order passed recently that is just as confusing as the words that are on there, as confusing as what is happening about essentially access to data for measuring fraud and waste, right? It's framed that way. But when you look at it in detail, and I am not a lawyer, but when you look at it, at least from a policy lens, there's a lot of room, important room for interpretation of that executive order that I think give us space for making sure that we can do our best to protect residents' data from harmful uses at the federal level. That's on the protection side. And so my hope is we can find ways where the sharing of data is narrowly defined well enough for the purposes of making sure that residents get what they needed from the federal level, that we're not completely cutting the cord, but we're not providing any more than is absolutely necessary for what is being requested. And this is sort of principle of data minimization and just making sure, and data sharing principles as well. You know, it can't just ask for everything and get it. There are certain guardrails, and we need to do our best to make sure those guardrails hold. On the side of really serving our residents, so hopefully we can protect, we can not overreact and not erase data. You know, what we'll continue to do in California is really on the piece of the how, and that's where I think it's going to be really important, the engagement with our folks across the state, residents, to figure out, you know, how do we do this with people? Because, you know, there's ways in which we can issue guidance, toolkits, et cetera, that give enough of the nuanced guidance to point people in the right direction in terms of how do you use this data to serve people without giving up the thing, right? So there's ways we can incorporate that into how we think about guidance, and make sure that we're empowering enough people, because we can't talk to everybody, but we have reach at the Office of Data Innovation to get information out. We have our Cal Academy, which is a training program. We have mechanisms to get these things into the system, so they have the best chance of doing what's right and what's ethical with the data that we have and the data we don't have. I'll pause there. Does that, anything else that I didn't cover there, or that you have clarifications on?
No, I think that's good. And I'm wondering if we want to move to see whether or not there's public comment, and I could turn things over to Augustine to do whatever it is Augustine does.
Thank you, Commissioner Pastor. We have one virtual public comment. When you hear your name, please raise your hand and someone from our team will go ahead and unmute you. You will have 2 minutes to make your public comment. Will Alejandra Ponce de Leon please raise her hand? Alejandra, you may begin your public comment when you're ready.
Hi, good evening. I was going to give public comment for the, I think the other agenda item that was about like the themes and discussions, so not necessarily about this theme. So I'll hold off until then.
Thank you. Are there any other in-person public comments? Okay, seeing none for this agenda item, we can go back to you, Commissioner Pastor.
Okay, well, I'm gonna move us back to agenda item 6, but I'm gonna ask Dr. Estes to think about key themes in terms of legislation that you want us to be aware of?
Thank you, Commissioner Pastor. If we can go to the next slide, please. Part of this conversation that we're going to have here, and I know that we are shorter on time, I do want to make sure that I'm bringing the commission up to some awareness of existing legislative proposals for your reference that have been introduced that are relevant to the two committees here today, budget and data, budget equity and data. One being AB 766, which is about updating strategic plans to reflect the use of data analysis and inclusive practices to more effectively advance racial equity. There's some additional content in there, but I just want to bring this to your attention because there is, we've heard in this meeting as well as previous meetings, a lot of information about some of the best practices that are out there on data as well as on budget. And we want to make sure that we're in lockstep with understanding what our elected officials are putting out there, but also what type of recommendations does the commission move forward that build upon something like this, complement it, or are clear in what the commission sees are the best practices. So this one, AB 766. The second one is AB 1186, which is related to establishing a demographic research unit within the Department of Finance. We heard Jason, who serves as the Chief Data Officer, talk about the data standards that have been developed here. This is about standardizing the collection of data as well as ensuring the effectiveness and efficiency of the data collection. So I know that the Office of Data and Innovation is looking at this proposal very closely, but I wanted to just make sure before we talk a little bit about key themes that you're aware of just where some of the legislature is in thinking about how racial equity is embedded into the state. And I see that Commissioner Onodera has a question, so I'm happy to take a question.
Oh, it's really just a minor clarification. I believe the Department of Finance already has a unit, a demographic research unit. So I think maybe the bill is just creating a new position within the unit.
Thank you for that clarification
Yeah.
related to the Chief Statistician of California. Now that you have that level of awareness, if we could go to the next slide. I wanted to make sure, and part of the reason why we wanted to have a joint meeting between these two committees is just the true intersection of data and how you allocate funds. I think this is a very clear overview that we received today, particularly from LA County, about the importance of understanding what the data says, being able to disaggregate, being able to look by geography, and really think about how these two areas move together. As much as we have separate committees, much of this work has to happen together. And so from our conversations that we've had as individual committees, I identified the following key themes that are listed here on the slide. I'll also say that some additional key themes were added just from the conversation today. And so between accountability, transparency, prioritization, input and engagement, and technical assistance, I'd also add geography. I think that's a common theme that I've heard a couple times come up, not just even today, but previously in previous meetings. The institutionalization of the culture of racial equity. And I think that also comes to the institutionalization of data, the values and the importance of values and decisions that bodies like yourselves as well as others make around what are priorities. And then infrastructure. I think that's a theme that comes up time and time again, because without infrastructure, you can't necessarily get to some of these other key themes. And I think there's an opportunity to potentially articulate what infrastructure could look like and how do you roll out infrastructure in a way that makes sense for where we are in our current budget climate, where we are currently in our social cultural climate. They're just things that we can be mindful of how we roll things out. So I wanted to present those to you all and give you all the opportunity to kind of sit with these, think through these. I'd love to hear from you all now. Is there anything that's kind of missing in these key themes? I do have a few more other slides, and I may hold off on that so that we can have a more detailed conversation with the full commission on specific themes and that I've seen in the two committees and how they might translate into actionable tools or strategies for the framework. But I did want to take the opportunity to open up discussion here. I know that we have about 14 minutes left for our meeting tonight, but yes, want to hear from the commissioners, and I will pause there and open up the floor or transition to Commissioner Pastor. We might have to keep the slides up so that folks can still see what the key themes are.
Dr. Estes, the one thing I would add, which I think is a little bit there on input and engagement, is also the question of narrative.
Got it.
I was really taken by what Supervisor Mitchell said today about equity as the solution strategy. And I think other stuff is captured there. But I think narrative has emerged from these committees.
And I would agree that I think narrative has also come about in the Community Engagement Committee. And I think as a full commission, you all have talked about that as well.
Commissioner Maldonado, soon I hope to be Dr. Maldonado.
Hopefully, if I get through defense. No, on the issue of transparency, I just wanted to underscore that I would hope that this committee and the commission would be not heavy-handed, but very intentionally prescriptive, because I think often when we say transparency, there's a watered-down version of it. And there's a very particular use of technology that I have in my mind as a commissioner of how I think that technology can aid in the very radical transparency of the process. And so I just want to underscore that that's not a simple recommendation for me. It's something that I actually have very prescriptive ideas around how transparent transparency is.
I'm not seeing any other hands from our commissioners. I'm now seeing Draco's hand.
My apologies. I forgot how to put my hand up. I was looking. I am comfortable with the themes that have been articulated here and the 2 to 3 additional ones that I've heard. I think my caution is more when everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. And so I feel like before we start opening it up to talk about additional themes, maybe we lock in like a limited number. Simply because if we do come up with a framework that says we have 10 themes, I don't know if that's going to be feasible or implementable. And so I'm comfortable. Right now, this is 5. And then we talked about, already see geography here in terms of prioritization. I'm okay with that being a theme if we want to do that. And I like the narrative piece. I think that does apply across other committees as well. I know we've talked about it quite a bit with community engagement and others as well, but I just don't want us to end up with 12. And so that's my just experience speaking.
And if I can respond, I think one way that we've tried to look at it and that we will continue to have the conversation is the model of transformation. Part of what I did to identify these themes was not only look at minutes from the different meetings, but also looking at that model of transformation. So there is, and as well as the commission values that you all approved in December. So there is overlap in that. And I hear you in not wanting to kind of expand the list. And I think that's some of the challenge that we are in this space is there is so much urgency to develop something that is all inclusive. And I think how do we look at these themes as being inclusive and shape them in a way that is inclusive and helps us develop out content behind the themes that actually are tangible and there's things that we're able to move forward in a timely manner. And I've collapsed actually a few into this, but there are probably ways that I could collapse geography, infrastructure, and narrative, and even the idea of being intentionally prescriptive. I think that is the role of the commission, is to find the balance of how do you be prescriptive, but also how do you provide information in a way that allows flexibility for agencies and departments to be able to implement. So these are just some of the tensions that we are working through, but I definitely hear you. And we don't want to document or a product that nobody's going to use because we have a laundry list of things to do. And as much as we know that there needs to be a laundry list, we also want to make sure that we're building something that can be sustainable and implemented and that we're growing the work that needs to happen over time.
Yeah, no, to Mr. Lawley's earlier point, I like that they have 4 kind of pillars as the standard. And somebody else, I think maybe it was Dr. Scorza, spoke to really managing the change as being the most difficult part. And I know in previous conversations we've spoken to the same concept. And so I just wanted to make sure that we don't lose sight and then end up with a document that is just too seen as and perceived as too broad, maybe not simple enough, because we've talked about simple language in other conversations as well. So we have to come up with a great narrative. But I think our last meeting in Imperial Valley, one of the things we said was, I also think we must have realistic expectations around what this framework can achieve, quote unquote, by itself. We can't expect that we're going to write a 10-page or 50-page document that's just going to, quote unquote, solve all of the racial equity problems for the state. There's got to be a lot of additional work that results after this too. And so I just want us to have that balanced perspective of not thinking, hey, we can write the perfect document that just, everyone's going to do it. And, whether we're there or not, to help guide them. So that's all for me. Thanks.
The one thing that I'll add, because this is a huge undertaking to undo hundreds of years of racism, discrimination, venture to say capitalism and patriarchy. But one thing that we are thinking of as a staff is how do you look at change management and organizational change as an important underlying conversation in what the commission moves forward. If we put forth something that can't be actualized, and we have to understand how agencies and departments at different levels actually think about some of this work, and how do you create something that they feel comfortable with, or uncomfortable, I think at times, but being able to be present and move things forward, and not just kind of give the document and think it's going to be something that folks can just take off the shelf and implement, but really think about those change management strategies.
Great, I'd like to, go ahead, Commissioner Bowles.
I'm really, what Trico said is really resonating with me. I would love to move from themes to pillars, as like we was referenced earlier, or pillars, because I was part of a group that was planning a strategic planning meeting, and they said, we don't want to do a strategic plan. We want a strategic frame, because you come up with a plan and then the wildfires happen and your plan is out the window. So I think that pillars that are really rooted in the values of this commission, not what agencies are comfortable with, but like the pillars that we think have to be, that are coming from the community, and that have to be the North Star for the framework, for everything that the agencies do. Like I would love to evolve these themes into pillars that are going to help people to, you know, as they're coming up with procedures and things around the framework, kind of brings them back to, you know, whatever you're developing needs to come back to what the pillar is. And I feel like that's a little bit more than just these themes that I'm seeing. They're gonna be a little more substantive and around kind of like what Commissioner Maldonado said, what does transparency actually mean? What does that pillar look like? It's gonna be prescriptive, it's gonna, you know, so that's really my hope. And like Traco said, we wouldn't have 12, we would have a few that help really shape the entire framework.
Thank you for that. And I think that's part of one of the questions that I left you all with in Imperial was, you know, how do you define the values, which transparency, I believe, is one of those values that you all voted for in December. But how do you want to define that? And what does it mean to actualize those values? And so those are some of the things that we will be workshopping through in June, is really getting to the core of what do we mean behind these pillars. They're themes right now, but I think we've already seen them evolve within the values that you all have identified within some of the key changes that you all have made to the draft model for transformation. And so part of this is also bringing this full circle and having those more in-depth conversations behind that.
Commissioner Maldonado.
Yeah, I just wanted to elevate that in the Budget Equity Committee meetings previously. We've had some amazing recommendations from the community and from a lot of our stakeholder groups. And I remember when these themes were first illustrated, it came as a result of the themes pulled from the litany of different recommendations they gave. And so I think it isn't difficult to convert or to just sort of relabel these themes into pillars, because I remember that there were very specific substantive recommendations, many of which I don't think needed to be reinvented or that we needed to overly intellectualize. They were ready to go. There were a few, some need some mulling and that we can, as a commission, go back and forth, but there were several that fell within these themes that I thought were ones that at least I wanted to get behind, you know, one or two or three that fit within these buckets. And so I just want to elevate that we should probably convert these into pillars and then reinvite those, you know, particular conversations. And then we can start plugging in, you know, evidence-based approaches and evidence-based recommendations into these themes now converted as pillars.
Yeah, I will say that I think that we're pretty close to actually we know what the evidence-based approaches are. I think we've heard them from advocates, we've heard them from community, we've heard them from our presenters, and we've heard them from you all. And part of this is making sure that we're creating this in an organizational structure with pillars that I think, as Commissioner Bowles said, kind of always bring us back to what is our why. We need to make sure that this has these 4 pillars, 5 pillars that really connect into this work. And I feel like we have a lot of that. I think it's really just about getting it to paper. And that's part of what I'll be working on in the next several weeks with the team, to be able to build that and bring that to you all ahead of our June meeting, so that you all have that space to say and to see the full picture. I think many of you have been to several other committee meetings as silent observers and have heard some of the discussion that has gone on. You've heard some of it within the full commission, but not everybody is seeing the full picture compared to how staff is actually seeing a lot of this. And so I think we're just in a space where we're now getting it to paper, and that we can start detailing out, these are those evidence-based practices. This is where we've seen it work. These are the tweaks we may need to make so that it is amenable within California, or this is the timeline that we need to look at. We may not be able to implement the big change in a current budget cycle, but it might be something to work towards. And so what are the things that we're doing to take those steps to put the commission in the right direction for what it sees are those big and bold ideas.
Great, we're going to open it up to public comment. Before I do, I really like pillars, and I think it makes it sturdier. And I really like some of this conversation made me think about the difference between being all inclusive, which is a laundry list, and being inclusive of the all, which is having a framework that incorporates. But with that, let me turn it over to Augustine, who will turn it over to the public.
Thank you, Commissioner Pastor. We only have one online public comment, and that'll be Alejandra Ponce de Leon. Alejandra, you may begin your public comment when you're ready.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. Just appreciate the space and a lot of the learning and just inspirational words from many of our guest speakers today. And I would just want to elevate the theme of, just centering back on the conversation with Supervisor Mitchell and the moment, what is needed in the moment, and realizing the attacks on our communities and what is happening. And also, I think in terms of the themes and we're, as part of the California Racial Equity Coalition, and member of Catalyst California myself, we are excited about June. I think that this is where it really feels like the rubber meets the road of like all of the different conversations, all of the input that you've gathered. And, we really want to encourage, that in June, we really are hopeful, to be able to see a full draft, as full of a draft and not an outline that's very high level. Because I think in this process, as you're teasing out and really like developing and shaping the framework, I think really seeing June as a key opportunity to bring as much of what is being developed and drafted to the community so that we're able to work with you and be thought partners as we've continued to be for this process. And so there is a little bit of scariness of or concern of like, oh my gosh, it's just a few more months away and we're in June. And so just there's a lot that needs to be done. And I know that there's a heavy lift, but just wanted to uplift like how we're looking forward to June and hopefully that we can get robust drafts so that we're able to work with you and continue to support and see you get to the finish line at the end of the year. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no additional online public comments. Or are there any in person?
There are no in-person public comment.
That concludes public comment for this item.
This moves us to agenda item 8. Next steps for staff action. We've covered a wide range of topics. It's been great to bring these two committees together because the work is so parallel and cross-fertilizing. Dr. Estes, are there action items you captured from today that you want to highlight?
Yeah, I think there's one that really stands out for me, and that is really how do we take what we've heard in this meeting as well as many of the other meetings and bring that together into something that starts to look like a framework or an outline of a framework is with as much detail as we can provide. I think one of the things, again, it's that balance that we have to find about how prescriptive should this be versus what is the environment that we are operating in versus like being bold. And so that's some of the tension that the staff is managing right now, but really trying to integrate many of these things as pillars and to understand where they are already sitting in some of the content that you've already discussed. And then mapping that out in a way that agencies and departments are able to start to build the will and to see how this fits into how they work. And, if any of you have heard any of my the podcasts I've participated in, I often say when they ask me what is my next thing, it's to work myself out of a job. And I love to hear Dr. Scorza say that because that's what we're here to do. Is we shouldn't need to have a commission, we should need to have an office, but this work should really be embedded. And so I really want to find that nice balance for this framework and start to map that out for each of you. So that's really the action item that I'm taking away. Making sure that what we do talk about is inclusive of the all, that has things that are rooted in our values, that uplifts the importance of transparency and what does intentional transparency look like and what does it mean to really bring the public and community along in the journey of racial equity as well as civic engagement with the state of California. So that's a lot to say, but nothing nothing that's bulleted out. But I do hear the charge from the commission, and we will be working on crafting out a commission meeting in June that is going to be much more workshop focused and discussion oriented. But prior to that, we will have a couple more meetings of our committees so that we can continue to gather this information in a way that allows us to have a really robust product by December 1st.
Thank you, Dr. Estes. For the rest of the committee, and I'll add a thought, are there any action items that you want to mention for the staff? So for me, at the risk, Commissioner Bowles, were you about to say something? You just look very thoughtful. Okay. It's good to look thoughtful. But the thing I want to add, which is silly in a way, my family, we like really stupid movies. And there's a really stupid Adam Sandler movie called The Water Boy, which has in it one of our favorite characters. I forget his name, but he keeps shouting at a football player, "You can do it. You can do it." I feel like Dr. Scosa's presentation today was, "You can do it." Like this has been done. It can be done. We can track dollars, connect them to communities, develop data systems. So for me, the action item, not necessarily before June, but I think at some point has to be working with our statewide staff to say, you can do it. It's been done. And I think getting that dialogue together. So that's something I think to think about. With that, any other comments from commissioners or Dr. Estes?
None for myself other than thank you, Commissioner Maldonado, for thugging it out till 9:38 East Coast time.
I'm only here representing California, so it's always from my state.
We appreciate that. Please change the policies in DC. Come home tomorrow. So, thanks to the Racial Equity Commission staff, to the commissioners, and the public for joining us today. This brings us to meeting adjournment. May we, by common consent, adjourn our joint committee meeting.
Yes.
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 Great. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. The next meeting of the commission is it will be virtual technical assistance and implementation committee meeting on May 15th. The community engagement committee meeting, also virtual, on May 22nd. And then there's an in-person viewing room for both virtual meetings at 1400 10th Street in Sacramento. We invite people to join us for those meetings. With that, we are adjourned at 6:40 p.m.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.